Freddy vs. Jason, the novelization by Stephan. Chapter 1. Despite the silvery glow of the full moon high above, the mist rolling in from the lake made it hard to see in the steady darkness of the night. The lake was immense. It reached from Higgins Haven in the north to Crystal Point down in the southwest. A wide passage over the far east side connected the lake to the sea, which most visitors found hard to believe because the lake was always so still, so quiet. Even tonight, even in the mist, the water rippled only gently, calmly, the surface of the lake forming a perfect mirror image of the twisting coils of gray vapor shimmering above it. Yet despite the tranquility of the lake, something was not quite right here. Much of the lake was surrounded by a dense forest of coniferous trees, hilly woodland made even more impenetrable by a thick tangle of undergrowth. But there were places where the evergreen wall was broken. The perimeter of the lake ran for miles, and here and there the trees suddenly gave way to open stretches of rocky and dusty shoreline. It was only natural, then, that people would build roads to these places, so that they could come and enjoy the beautiful scenery. And it was also only natural that people would want to come out and live by the lake, or maybe just come here for some fun. In reality, the roads leading up to the lake were little more than dirt tracks, and the few settlements that had been built by the water were nothing more than feeble efforts to tame an indomitable wilderness. Not a single week went by when the people who lived here didn't have to put up with at least one power outage. And when the people here went shopping for groceries, they stocked up for months. But all the uncertainty somehow made everyone feel closer to nature, as if living by the lake was somehow more real. Staying here was an adventure. You could swim, you could go fishing, or you could just idle your time away in a rowing boat and get away from it all. And the lake was a natural for kids, which all goes to explain why, back in 1935, someone thought it would be a good idea to build a summer camp here. They called it Camp Crystal Lake. The camp occupied the largest area of open shoreline by the lake, and was nothing more than a few wood cabins built beside a long floating jerry that ran out onto the surface of the water. It was late now, and the cabin lights had all been turned out, all except one. Heather was getting impatient. She had somewhere she really needed to be right now, but as a full-time camp counselor, it was her job to make sure that all the kids in all the cabins were put to bed. So she had gone round the cabins one by one and called for lights out. This was the last cabin. Thank God. Heather hit the light switch and smiled. She looked back along the room. Although it was misty outside, there was just enough light from the outdoor lamps to show that all the kids were quiet and curled up for the night. They almost looked cute, lined up in their rows of little camp beds. Cute? What was she thinking? They'd been driving her mad all day with their constant noise and running around. It was about time the little monsters ran out of energy. And it wasn't as if it had been easy to get this particular cabin quiet. It was the kids from New York. They were always a handful, and she always left them till last. But now they were asleep, all of them. Convinced no one would see her, Heather reached into the straw bag she was carrying. Beer o'clock. Heather pulled out the bottle of booze, opened it up, and took a swig. Then she took another. What was she doing here? Why had she taken this dumb summer job? Funny, but she couldn't remember. Whatever. Another swig, and it's time to go. Heather reached out for the door handle and... "Heather?" a voice called from behind her. Heather almost jumped out of her smooth teenage skin and spun around. It was Billy. He was just standing there, right behind her, wearing his pajamas, a sad little look on his 8-year-old face. "I had a nightmare," he sobbed, half asleep. "Will you stay with me?" Heather snatched a quick look around the room. Good, no one else had woken up. If she could get Billy back to bed quick, then she could probably get away before they all woke up and started whining. "Come on, you're a big boy. Back to bed now." She smiled and tried to look reassuring, but he didn't budge. Now that Heather's eyes had fully adjusted to the dark, she could see the poor kid looked terrified. Then she saw his eyes flick down to the bottle in her hand. "Go!" she snapped, suddenly on the defensive. If that kid told anyone... Billy raced straight back to bed, more frightened of Heather's sudden outburst than by the boogeyman of his bad dreams. "Damn it!" Heather shook her head and dropped the bottle back into her bag, where it landed snugly on a red and white beach towel. Billy was still scared and shaking in his bed when he heard Heather walk out of the cabin and gently close the door after her. Then he heard her lock it. Despite the mist, it actually wasn't a bad night to go swimming. The fog was due to evaporation. It had been warm over Crystal Lake for, well, as long as Heather could remember, so the water was a good temperature for skinny dipping. The camp was quiet now, and all the cabin lights were finally out, so Heather made her way down to the lake, safe in the knowledge that no one would be watching her. She had arranged to meet someone there at midnight down by the water. She held her watch up to a lamp fixed to the outside of one of the cabins. It would be another 10 minutes or so before Mike was due to show. Mike. Buff. Heather dropped her bag by the water's edge and started to unbutton her jeans. A sound from behind her. If Billy had followed her out of that cabin, she would not be responsible for her actions. But when Heather looked around, she saw no one, so it had to be Mike fooling around. So Heather called out, "Mike, is that you?" Nothing. There were only a few outdoor lights around the camp. Some bolted onto cabin walls, others hanging from cables and tall wooden posts, like the lights that ran down the length of the jetty. But there were still plenty of places where someone could hide. Still too many shadows. Heather looked every which way but saw no one, and when she looked out into the forest, all she could see was darkness. She knew Mike could be an asshole, but it was late and she was tired. "If this is your idea of foreplay, I'm not impressed." Still no reply. "All right, fuck you then. I'm heading in." Heather removed her pink blouse to reveal a tight, naked body graced with shoulder-length strawberry blonde hair. Then she dived into the water of Crystal Lake. At least another 20 minutes went by before Heather realized Mike was decidedly late. While the fog swirled over her head and coiled its way into the trees of the forest, Heather had successfully managed to chill out, alternating between swimming and simply floating on the temperate, relaxing water. But all the while she had heard more strange sounds coming from inside the trees. She was convinced it was Mike. He was being a total jerk. Fine. If he wanted to waste his time hiding in the woods trying to scare her, then it was his loss. He could be here in the water having fun, but no. He preferred to stay out in the forest, rediscovering the total loser within. There it was again, that noise, like the breaking of a branch or some leaves or something. "Mike!" she shouted. "Come on, it's not funny anymore!" It wasn't funny in the first place, but she was trying to be kind. Still, she got no answer, and for the first time that night, Heather grew nervous and just a little afraid. Thinking about it, there she was alone, naked in the water, at midnight, with no one else around. And all the while she was convinced that there was someone out there in the woods watching her, stalking her. What if Mike was a wacko? Heather had had enough. She quickly swam back to shore, where she hurriedly toweled herself down and threw on her blouse. The wet on her body made the thin fabric cling to her firm, moist breasts. She bent down to reach for her jeans when another branch seemed to snap, somewhere nearby among the trees. Only this time the sound was much louder and much closer. It couldn't be Mike. Nervousness turned to fear. Darting her gaze in all directions, Heather decided to leave right now. Wearing only her shirt, she grabbed her shoes, pants, and bag and made for the safety of the nearest cabin, the last one she'd been to during lights out. She could lock it from the inside and use the phone. Another sound. She turned and noticed that her sudden movement had caused the mist to twirl and spiral all around her. She also noticed something else. There, further back in the mist, a dark figure. Now she's running. A few seconds later and she was at the cabin door. She was about to enter when she decided to take another look back. There was no one there. I must be losing it. Heather breathed a sigh of relief and was now feeling more than a little stupid. She was a camp counselor. She knew how much wildlife there was in the region. Most animals will avoid direct human contact. She was being retarded. Okay, crazy time's over. She grabbed the handle of the cabin door and turned it. Locked. Heather cursed under her breath. She had locked the damn thing herself, so she should have known. She opened her bag, raised it towards the light, and looked inside for the key. She couldn't see it, so she searched through the whole bag, then through her clothes, the breast pockets of her blouse. Shit! The key was missing. She knew she had it when she went down to the lake, so there was only one place it could be. No way. There was no way she was going back. Not now. Maybe if she could get one of the kids to open a window for her, she could climb through, then maybe sort things out in the morning. Taking another quick look around her and happy that she was alone, Heather nipped barefoot along the cabin window nearest Billy's bed. Of all the kids most likely to still be awake, Billy was the one, what with his nightmares and everything. Heather was about to tap lightly on the window with her knuckles when, God damn it! Billy's head popped into view, his sudden appearance scaring Heather half to death. She really had been rattled by this whole thing. Billy! Heather was trying to sound calm, in control. Can you open the window for... Billy gave her the finger. He didn't even wait for Heather to finish her sentence. He just flipped her the bird, then went back to bed. Heather couldn't believe it. She was a camp counselor. She was much older than he was. She had to go back and find the damn key. The fog was closing in, but she couldn't hear a thing, only the gentle lulling of the lake. She had no choice. It was just an animal, or something. Holding tight to her bag, Heather ran full speed in the direction of the lake. She refused to let the trees and the eerie fog play with her imagination, and she felt extremely proud of herself when, after only a few moments, she found the key lying in the dirt close to the waterside. Grinning with her success, Heather bent down to reach for the key, and saw two heavy black boots emerge from the mist, right in front of her face. Instantly, Heather was nauseous with fear, and her heart pounded with the beat of an unexpected shock, as if someone was punching her from inside her chest. She didn't want to look, but she had to. Almost by instinct, Heather raised her head and looked into a pair of eyes, staring out at her from a hockey mask. A man, huge, hulking, ragged, and rotten, easily way over 7 foot tall, broad and powerful. Oh my God! What she could see of his head was deformed, misshapen. The bald skin was blackened, decayed, withered, rotted, and the skull was bulbous, almost mutated. A few long faded strands of straggly gray hair trailed down from a dead patch on the back of the man's head. And when Heather looked into the dark, emotionless eyes inside the mask, she knew she was staring into the face of death. This was Camp Crystal Lake. This murderous behemoth was Jason Voorhees, and Jason Voorhees was going to kill her. The swinging machete blow almost took off Heather's head, but she ducked just in time, somehow able to overcome at the very last minute the terror that had almost paralyzed her. It was sheer instinct that led to the blade slicing through Heather's hair instead of through her neck. Heather screamed and started the fight for her life. Blinded by panic, she ran out into the fog, and before she knew it, was soon headed into the forest away from the lights, away from where that man, that thing with the machete, could see her. Branches scratched at her bare legs, leaves whiplashed across her face, and her feet were cut by thorns and sharp stones. But she kept on running, until finally, crying and scared, she tripped on a moss-covered tree root and fell flat on her face. This couldn't be happening to her. It couldn't be real. Crack! She got up and carried on running. She could hear him, like before, by the lake. She could hear him breaking through the undergrowth. All she had to do was move away from the noise. Her face ran slap bang into the tree. She'd been so worried about what was behind her that she never saw it coming. All the same, she felt relieved that it was a tree she'd run into and not... She turned. Jason Voorhees. No! He stood right in front of her. No! She cried out. It was pathetic. She was crying. The machete plunged into her gut with such force that Heather fell straight back, against the tree she'd run into. The blade of the machete pierced through skin, through muscle, through intestine, through spine, through muscle, through skin, then out through the back of the fucking pine tree. Jason had stabbed Heather with such force that he'd scooped the girl off her feet and pinned her up against the tree trunk. Poor Heather just hung there, bolted to the trunk by Jason's machete, her feet dangling above the ground. Blood poured out of the gaping wound in her stomach and ran down her legs until it was dripping down from her toes. As Heather's life slowly ebbed away, she tried to lift her head. Her eyes crawled slowly upwards in their sockets until her fading sight came to rest on the impassive white plastic of the hockey mask. Then she was gone. Jason stood for a moment. He looked at the body. Then he tilted his head and looked at it from another angle. There was something familiar about his victim, but it was over. Jason reached out to pull the machete free with one of his black-gloved hands, when he, too, found himself hearing a strange sound from somewhere within the mist-enshrouded woodland all around it. He paused and looked around. As Jason turned to see where the noise had come from, he failed to notice the head of Heather slowly rise up behind him. He did not see that the dead girl had somehow come back to life. He certainly did not expect the dead girl to speak. "I should have been watching them." Heather's voice was gasping, unnatural, and her tone was more of spite than remorse. "Not drinking," she sneered. "Not meeting a boy at the lake." Jason wheeled around to see who was talking, but it was not Heather he saw pinned to the tree by his machete. It was a different girl. It was someone else, someone familiar. This new talking corpse continued in the same theme as living dead Heather. "I deserve to be punished," she said, before changing in front of Jason's very eyes into a dead young man. "We all deserve to be punished," he moaned, before changing into another body and another and another. In moments, the body on the tree was constantly changing, constantly in flux, constantly shifting from one bloody young corpse into another. A young blonde-haired woman with an ice pick through the side of her head, a fat curly-haired chump in a wetsuit, a cute guy dressed in nothing but jeans, a hippie guy and his chick, a puny little fuck in a paintball outfit, a whole series of punks and gangbangers, teenagers, camp counselors, cops, all victims whose voices seemed to blend, to merge an undead chorus of guilt. "We all deserve to be punished for what we did to you, for what we did to your mother." Jason knew these people. He had killed them all, every last one of them. Unsure what to do next, Jason missed the figure creeping stealthily through the mist behind him. Suddenly, Jason knew what to do. He had killed all these people once, now he would kill them all again. Stirring into action at last, the brute withdrew his machete from the ghostly crowd corpse. He was about to hack the shifting body into a dozen bloody pieces when it completely dissipated into the mist. Gone. Heather was gone. Dr. Cruz was gone. Creighton Duke was gone. His victims, they were all gone. Jason stared at the tree. The hole made by his machete was still there. So was the figure behind him. A hand reached out and tapped Jason on the back of his shoulder. The hand was wearing a glove with 5 razor-sharp knives bolted to the fingers. Machete raised to kill, Jason spun sharply on his heels, but there was no one there. Or was there? Slowly coming forward out of the mist was a woman. Not a teenager, a woman. She was familiar. Another victim? No. Familiar. Her coarse, short gray hair, her thick, heavily knit sweater, her strong, mature build. Was she walking or was she gliding through the mist? He knew her. "Jason!" That voice! "Jason, my special, special boy. Do you know what your gift is? It can't be. No matter what they do to you, you cannot die. You can never die." She was right. As Jason stood there, impassive, motionless, watching her, his mind was ablaze with the truth of her words. And suddenly, his lives exploded before him. He had been stabbed, chainsawed, shot, hit with an axe, hanged, chopped across the face with his own machete, drowned, battered with the claw hammer, electrocuted, set on fire, blown up, melted by poisonous chemicals, and dragged down to hell. Hell! Hell? Where was he? What was he doing here? "You've just been sleeping, honey, but the time has come to wake up. Mommy has something she wants you to do." Mommy? That face, that voice. Jason was looking straight into the eyes of Pamela Voorhees, his mother. It was she who had started all the murders at Crystal Lake. When two camp counselors let her son drown in 1957 because they were too busy necking and fucking, Pamela took out her mother's revenge on the whole damn camp. She killed the counselors, killed them all. When people tried to reopen the camp in the 1960s, she stopped them. First, she poisoned all the drinking water. When that failed, she resorted to arson and burned down some of the cabins. The police never found out who was responsible for all the trouble, and eventually the camp was closed. And it stayed that way until 1980, when local do-gooder Steve Christie spent over $25,000 rebuilding the place. It took him over a year to get the camp ready again, but his project was doomed from the beginning. No sooner had the new counselors showed up for work than Pamela Voorhees began to kill them. 5 she cut up with a hunting knife, 2 she pinned with arrows, and 1 she dealt with by an axe blow to the face. For his trouble, Steve Christie took a knife in the gut. Soon only one of the counselors was left, Alice. As Pamela chased the terrified teenager, she thought she could hear the voice of her poor drowned boy, Jason, urging her on to slaughter. But the voice Alice heard that night at Crystal Lake was Pamela's own. "Kill her, Mommy! Kill her! She can't hide! No place to hide! Get her, Mommy! Get her! Kill 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 her!" Pamela Voorhees was quite insane. Finally, she cornered Alice on the shore by the lake, and it was there, in a moment of sheer desperation, that Alice took hold of a machete and hacked Pamela Voorhees' head clean off her shoulders. When Pamela's headless corpse hit the ground, blood spat forward and mingled with the sand. But when the cops came to clean up the mess, they couldn't find the machete or Mrs. Voorhees' head. Some of her clothes had gone missing too. Jason had taken them. He had seen the slaying of his mother, had stolen her remains, and had taken them to his hovel shack in the heart of the forest, where he created a shrine in her sick memory. From that day on, Jason lived alone, roaming the forest around Crystal Lake like a wild, savage beast, until the day came when the kids returned to the area, when he embarked upon his own reign of bloody vengeance. They had killed his mother. Now he would kill them. It was soon after the outsiders returned to Crystal Lake that someone had tried to fool him. A girl. She tried to kill him, tried to get near him, and she succeeded by pretending to be his mother. Thunder and lightning crashed over Crystal Lake, casting Jason and Pamela Voorhees into violent relief. He merely stared as she smiled at him, at Jason, her beloved son. Was she real? Jason had lived through many deaths. Perhaps his mother also was somehow alive beyond the grave. But Jason was not standing by Crystal Lake, as even he himself had just dimly recalled. The last time Jason walked on Earth, he had been pulled down to hell. Even now, his real body lay resting in the dirt of the damned, while his spirit, his vile undead energy, existed here, in the illusory Crystal Lake of the abyss. Jason had been good to hell. He had relentlessly, ceaselessly carried out his bloody killings, time and time again. In return, hell had been good to Jason, preserving his crushed life force in this perpetual fantasy of homicide. Jason had butchered Heather over 1,000 times, in a predictable, unyielding loop of machete wipeouts. Only now the loop had been broken. Another of hell's most wretched servants had used what power remained to him to break into Jason's mind, to break into his dreams. As lightning flashed its brilliance across Jason's hockey mask a second time, Jason's real body, in its real unmarked grave, jolted into life. Pamela Voorhees was triumphant. "Rise up, Jason! Your work isn't finished! Hear my voice and live again!" Within the grave, the massive, decomposed body of Jason Voorhees began to shake, to regenerate. Wounds and injuries began to heal. His black heart started to beat. He was somehow becoming stronger, younger, more vital, more powerful. The two dead eyes inside the hockey mask flicked open. This was no ordinary grave with a casket and a neat 6-foot trench. Jason had been dragged to hell. He had been buried alive, pulled down and down through layers of earth, and left to rot in the soil. But now, as more strength returned to Jason, he started to claw his way up, inch by inch. He fought his way up through the packed dirt, until at last his hands broke up through the surface. And then the earth above him exploded as Jason burst up out of his grave. Jason Voorhees had been reborn. Back in the memory of Crystal Lake, Pamela Voorhees watched the spirit of her son fade away. "Make them remember me, Jason!" she called as her son vanished into life. Pamela Voorhees, mother of eternal vengeance. An evil grin crossed her face. She had sent Jason back. He would do as Mommy told him. He would kill everyone in his path to avenge her murder. It's a pity Jason was too stupid to realize that his mom was long dead and was never coming back. Once Jason had finally departed Crystal Lake, Mrs. Voorhees' face began to melt away, the flesh dripping and withering, almost as if beneath the heat of a blowtorch. And when Pamela next spoke, it was the voice of Freddy Krueger. "Make them remember what fear tastes like," he sniggered. Suddenly, Crystal Lake was gone. In its place was the darkness again. The darkness Freddy was desperate to escape. And where once was the sound of the whispering waves of Crystal Lake, there were now only the cries of tortured souls. All signs of Pamela Voorhees were gone. Jason was back on Earth, and the pretense was over. But the game had only just begun. Freddy Krueger was now himself again. The hat, the razor glove, and the striped sweater. And the fires of hell blazed in Freddy's eyes as he looked beyond the darkness and across the infernal wasteland surrounding him. Everything was going to plan. All he had to do was move his pawn into position, and then the final round could begin. Freddy thought about all the fresh souls he could look forward to swallowing. "I've been away from my children for far too long," he brooded. It was time for Jason Voorhees to go to work. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been Chapter 1 of Freddy vs. Jason, the novelization by Stephan. And wow, what I was hoping for we got. We got just as in-depth of a backstory on the history of Jason as we did with Freddy. And if the movie had handled Jason's resurrection the way the book did, it would have made so much more sense, would have been so much better. Because we all know Jason got pulled into the ground at the end of Jason Goes to Hell. You know, and then in Freddy vs. Jason, he's like leaned up against a tree. It's like they totally ignored Jason Goes to Hell in the movie. I'm so glad the book is going in the direction of following Jason Goes to Hell, just like as Freddy's following the Freddy movies. They really couldn't do a lot of that in the movie, I understand, because like Paramount, they couldn't get, even though they owned it, like the footage from Paramount or something they couldn't use. I don't understand why they didn't use footage from Jason Goes to Hell, though, in Freddy vs. Jason, because that was the ultimate precursor to Freddy vs. Jason. But there was some funny things and some awesome things in this chapter that I took note of. The first and foremost was at the beginning of the chapter, the author made sure to say that Crystal Lake connected to the sea. And I almost feel like he put that line there in the book just to make Jason Takes Manhattan make sense, because people are always saying, how do people go from Crystal Lake to the ocean to New York in the boat? Well, I guess he just filled in that plot hole right there. And how cool would it have been in Jason Goes to Hell, in the scene where he stabs the girl into the tree and it starts changing to different victims, if the victims had actually been, like this book said, Shelley from Part 3, Dr. Cruz, Creighton Duke. I mean, that was just awesome. You could sit there and listen to the description of these characters in the book, and you know who they are, and that would have been so cool if they could have, CGI'd that, the characters from all those movies. I love how much more a novelization can do than a movie can sometimes, and it really shows in this first chapter of Freddy vs. Jason. The prologue was awesome with the Freddy backstory. The whole Friday the 13th chapter here, it was like the backstory on Jason. Really dug that. I loved the thought process of Jason when his mother shows up, and, he's thinking back to Part 2 and everything when he got fooled the first time. At least it crossed his mind. Not sure how this is going to get us into the story from the movie. Because in the movie, he's like, the kids on Elm Street have been bad, Jason. So maybe the next chapter will explain how Jason ends up on Elm Street in Springwood. Looking forward to that. But as far as this chapter goes, I was just blown away. I am still just as hooked as I was with the prologue. The writer is doing an awesome job. I'm still a little irked by the whole 5 finger knives on Freddy's glove, but I think I can let that go. Because, this author is just awesome. He did a lot of research on these movies and stuff. Hell, a couple of the victims that morphed on the tree was Chili and Chuck from Part 3. Shit, it's awesome. I was going to go ahead and do chapters 1 and 2 tonight, but it's been storming here today, and I've already had to stop and start so many times just to get this one chapter out to you guys tonight, and I just wasn't going to be able to get both. I did dig the whole backstory on Pamela Voorhees, about all the ways she kept trying to stop the camp from reopening. I was a little confused about, it said that Jason saw his mom get killed, in 1980. And then he kept her head and stayed in the woods for years or whatever before he started killing. But we all know that Part 2 takes place just a couple years after Part 1. And if that's the case, it's not like he stayed there for years and years. Shit, he went after Alice at the beginning of Friday the 13th Part 2. I was actually hoping the book would have talked about that, since it went so much in depth of all the other movies and stuff in the Friday the 13th universe. Well, I'm going to be back very soon with the next chapter or so of this book. I'm really enjoying it so far. I hope you guys are too. Record number of views on this one for a first night upload on the prologue. Thank you all so much for tuning into that and for giving the video a like. Please give this one a thumbs up as well. I really appreciate all of you for listening. I can't wait to see how Jason ends up on Elm Street. See if the book gives us a little better explanation of how he gets there. I'm really looking forward to it, and I'll be back very soon. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening. Killer, Mommy! I'm so sorry you had to hear me say that so many times tonight in that voice. And pleasant dreams!
Hi, this is Jeffrey Reddick, creator of Final Destination.
Greetings, Slashaholics. This is David Bergantino, author of the Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror books, the Bard's Blood horror Shakespeare books.
Hey guys, this is Jason Brooks, Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th Vengeance.
Hey, this is Slasher Pepper.
Hey everybody, it's CJ Graham, Jason, Friday the 13th Part 6.
This is William Pattison, known to Friday the 13th fans as Eric Morris.
Hi, this is Deborah Voorhees from Friday the 13th Part 5.
Hey folks, this is Adam Marcus, director of Jason Goes to Hell and Secret Santa.
Hello, kiddies. This is John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper.
Hi, this is Kane Hodder, better known as Jason from Friday the 13th, Victor Crowley from Hatchet.
And you are listening.
You're listening.
And you're listening.
And you're listening.
I just want to make sure you guys know you're listening.
You are listening.
And you are listening.
And you are lucky enough to be listening.
Okay, boils and ghouls, you are listening.
You are listening
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s slasher librarian.
To the 80s slasher librarian.
The 80s slasher librarian.
To the 80s slasher librarian.
To 80s slasher librarian.
To 80s slasher librarian.
To the 80s slasher librarian.
To the 80s slasher librarian.
To the 80s slasher librarian. Keep listening, or I'll kill you.